In a remote village of Thailand, far from the noise of the world, lived a Buddhist female monk named Siwit. Clad in her saffron robe, she had spent years in a quiet monastery, dedicating herself to meditation, chanting, and spiritual discipline. For the outside world, she was a figure of peace and wisdom, respected, serene, and content. Yet beneath that calm surface, Siwit was quietly battling a storm of doubt. She had followed the teachings of Buddhism faithfully, day in and day out. Rising before dawn, sitting cross-legged for hours in the stillness of the temple, she tried to silence her thoughts and connect with enlightenment. But lately, a deep unease had started to grow within her. It wasn't loud, it was subtle, like the faint rustling of leaves in a windless forest. A question had taken root in her heart: is this truly the peace I've been seeking? One night, everything changed. As she lay on her mat beneath the stars, Siwit had a dream unlike any she had ever experienced. In this vision, she saw a radiant figure, resembling Buddha, yet unlike any statue or image she had known. His face glowed with a divine light, and his presence filled her with both awe and serenity. The figure looked directly at her and spoke in a calm yet commanding voice. "Go to Borobudur Temple in Magelang, Java. There, you will find the peace you've been seeking." She awoke, with her heart pounding in her chest. The dream was too vivid, too alive to ignore. It was as if her soul had been shaken awake. For days she kept it to herself, silently meditating on the dream. Was it a test? A sign? A message from the divine? Eventually, she made her decision. She packed a small bag, bid farewell to her fellow monks, and without telling anyone the true reason, she began her journey, leaving the only life she had ever known. The journey to Indonesia was long and unfamiliar. Every mile brought more uncertainty, but it also stirred something new inside her: hope. For the first time in years, she felt like she was not just living, but searching. When she finally arrived at the towering Borobudur Temple in Magelang, her heart skipped a beat. The temple was breathtaking. Built centuries ago, it stood like a silent guardian of time, filled with intricate carvings and a sense of ancient wisdom. She walked through the temple's courtyard, taking in the quiet air and the rhythmic sounds of birds and distant wind. Sitting down in a quiet corner, she closed her eyes to meditate. But just as she was settling into her silence, she heard something she had never heard before. It was a sound, soft at first, then growing clearer. A voice unlike chanting or bells. It was the adhan, the Muslim call to prayer, echoing from a mosque in the distance. Allahu Akbar! Allahu Akbar! The sound pierced her heart. Her eyes flew open, and she looked toward the direction of the voice. She didn't understand the words, but something inside her stirred, an emotion so overwhelming it brought tears to her eyes. There was no explanation for it. It was a sound that felt familiar, as if she had always known it, even without ever hearing it before. She sat there, unable to move, frozen in both wonder and confusion. The call ended, and the silence returned. But something had shifted. Moments later, her head began to feel light, her vision blurred, and darkness slowly overtook her senses. She fainted. When she opened her eyes again, she was in a hospital room. The sterile lights above her blinked softly. Her head was heavy, but her heart was still echoing with the sound of that mysterious prayer. Beside her sat a man, quietly peeling a banana. He wore a simple shirt and had a kind smile. In his hand was a plastic bag filled with fried snacks. "You're awake," he said warmly. "I found you collapsed near the temple. Don't worry, you're safe now." His name was Rahmath, a fried food seller who lived nearby. Despite his humble appearance, there was a strange sense of tranquility in the way he spoke. Siwit nodded weakly, still trying to piece together the moment. Over the next few hours, Rahmath helped her settle in. He explained that he had studied at an Islamic boarding school when he was younger, and now lived a simple life selling food around Magelang. But more than that, he had a calmness about him, something that reminded Siwat of the peace she was still chasing. They began talking. At first, just small things, where she was from, what brought her here. She didn't tell him everything, not yet. But there was something comforting about his presence, something that made her feel like she didn't need to pretend. Eventually, as she recovered, she shared the dream that brought her to Java. The radiant figure, the instruction to come to Borobudur. And then she asked him, "That sound I heard, what was it?" Rahmat smiled gently. "That was the adhan, the Muslim call to prayer. It reminds us 5 times a day to stop, reflect, and connect with Allah." "Allah?" she repeated, the word foreign on her tongue, yet strangely soft. "Yes," he nodded. "The one true God." There was a pause. Siwat looked away, staring out the window at the blue sky. A feeling stirred within her, a longing she couldn't explain. And that was just the beginning. The days that followed Siwat's collapse passed slowly, yet meaningfully. She stayed in Majlang, resting and recovering under Rahmat's gentle care. Though he was a simple fried food vendor, there was something profound about him. He never pushed, never preached, but his presence alone brought comfort and calm. Siwat found herself drawn to Rahmat, not in a romantic way at first, but in a deeply spiritual sense. She had spent years surrounded by monks and teachers who spoke of enlightenment, but with Rahmat, there was no show, no ego, just truth, presented with humility. One quiet afternoon, she finally opened up. "I've followed Buddhism my whole life," she said softly as they sat under a tree near a field. "But something has always felt incomplete. I kept thinking peace was silence. But when I heard that call, the adhan, it wasn't silent. And yet, I felt peace like never before." Rahmat nodded, listening carefully. "Sometimes," he said, "we think silence is the answer. But true peace isn't the absence of sound, it's the presence of purpose." His words sank deep into her soul. They continued to meet often, talking as they walked along rice paddies and quiet roads. Siwat had so many questions, about Islam, about prayer, about who Allah really was. Rahmat never tired of answering. He explained the concept of Tawheed, the oneness of God, the reason Muslims bowed in prayer, and the idea that this life was a test, not the final destination. "There is no God but Allah," he told her one evening. "And Muhammad, peace be upon him, is his final messenger. That's the foundation of our faith." Siwat closed her eyes, trying to process. The simplicity of it struck her. Not hundreds of deities or spiritual figures. Just one. One creator. One message. But with understanding came confusion. The life she had known, her robe, her temple, her vows, how could she leave all that behind? "I feel torn," she confessed one evening. "I'm drawn to Islam. But I'm afraid. My family expects me to remain a monk. My community sees me as a symbol. If I walk away, I will lose everything." Rahmat looked at her kindly. "Faith," he said gently, "requires courage. Even the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, was rejected by his own people when he first brought the truth. But he stood firm, because truth is not always easy, it's just always right." That night, Siwat lay awake for hours, staring at the ceiling. The dream that led her here replayed in her mind. The glowing figure. The call to Borobudur. The unexpected collapse. The call to prayer. Rahmat. All of it pointed in one direction. But could she truly take that step? The next morning, Rahmat invited her to attend a congregational prayer at the small mosque near his home. At first, she hesitated. But her heart was restless, curious, open, seeking. Inside the mosque, she sat in the back, watching. As the prayer began, the worshippers moved in unison. Their faces calm, their bodies bowing, rising, then prostrating in complete submission. Siwat had spent years meditating in silence, eyes closed. But here, in the middle of whispered verses and coordinated prayer, she saw something different: surrender. When the prayer ended, her eyes were wet with tears. She didn't fully understand the Arabic words, but her heart understood everything. Later that evening, she spoke to Rahmat again. "Why does it feel like I've known this all along?" she whispered. "Because the soul," he said, "recognizes the truth, no matter where it comes from." In the days that followed, she continued learning. Each time she read a verse from the Qur'an, it spoke to her heart. She learned about Maryam, Mary, about Isa, Jesus, about the prophets, so many names familiar from her interfaith studies, yet presented in a way that felt different. Pure. Clear. One verse struck her deeply. "Indeed, in the remembrance of Allah do hearts find rest." Surah Ar 13:28. It felt like the verse had been written just for her. Still, fear lingered. Would her family ever accept her? Would they even speak to her again? But eventually, the feeling of truth overwhelmed the fear of rejection. She turned to Rahmat. "I want to become a Muslim." His face lit up with a gentle smile. "Are you sure?" "I am," she said. "I've never been more certain of anything in my life." And so, in front of a small group of witnesses at the mosque, Siwat stood, trembling but determined. With Rahmat by her side, she repeated the Shahada. "I bear witness that there is no God but Allah, and Muhammad is his messenger." In that moment, it was as if the weight of the world lifted from her shoulders. A wave of peace, deeper than any she had ever known, washed over her. She wasn't just Siwat the monk anymore. She was Sister Siwat, a believer, a seeker who had finally found what she was searching for. As days turned into weeks, something else began to blossom, something unexpected but natural. She and Rahmat had grown closer. Their spiritual connection turned into a bond of respect, admiration, and eventually, love. One afternoon, sitting under a banyan tree, Rahmat said gently, "I never imagined meeting someone like you. But Allah brings people together in ways we can't plan." Siwat smiled. "Do you think this is part of His plan?" "I believe it is," he said softly. "And if you allow it, I would like to walk this journey with you." Their nikah, Islamic marriage, was a simple ceremony held in the same mosque where she took her shahada. Surrounded by a few friends and neighbors, they exchanged vows not only of love, but of shared faith. It was the beginning of a new chapter. But the past had not yet let go. After her conversion and marriage, Siwat's life in Magelang felt like a dream, quiet, simple, and filled with purpose. With Rahmat by her side, she embraced her new identity as a Muslim woman. Every day was a step forward, not just into a new faith, but into a deeper understanding of who she truly was. But not everything was easy. Her past still echoed in her heart. Back in Thailand, she had once been a respected monk. Her parents, devout Buddhists, had raised her to walk the path of enlightenment. To them, she had not just abandoned a religion, she had forsaken an entire legacy. Letters began arriving from her hometown. Some were filled with disappointment, others with outright condemnation. "You have left the true path," one letter said. "We are ashamed. You will regret this." Each word stung like a blade. Siwat cried quietly many nights. Not because she regretted her choice, but because she missed her family. She missed her mother's cooking, her father's quiet wisdom, the peaceful mornings in the village temple courtyard. But no matter how deep the pain, her faith kept her grounded. Rahmat noticed the sadness in her eyes. One evening, as they sat on their small porch watching the sunset, he gently asked, "Do you want to visit your family?" Siwat hesitated. "I do, but I'm afraid. What if they reject me completely?" Rahmat held her hand. "Even if they don't accept your faith, maybe they'll still accept your heart. We won't know until we try." Together they made plans for a trip back to Thailand. When their plane landed, a wave of emotion crashed over Siwat. Everything looked the same: her hometown, the markets, the temple bells in the distance. but she was not the same. They walked through narrow streets until they reached her parents' home. Standing before the old wooden door, Siwat took a deep breath. Her hands trembled. Rahmat gave her a reassuring nod. When the door opened, her mother stood frozen. Her eyes welled with tears, not of joy, but of shock. "Siwat," she whispered. Siwat lowered her gaze. "Mama, I'm home." Her father appeared behind her mother, his face hardened by months of unanswered questions and unresolved anger. They invited her in, but the room was filled with silence thicker than any words. Finally, her father spoke. "Why, Siwat? Why would you leave the path we gave you?" She explained everything. The dream. The journey. The call to prayer. Her time in Majlang. The peace she found in Islam. The man who didn't try to convert her but patiently guided her. Her mother listened, quietly crying. Her father, arms crossed, remained silent. "I didn't leave to hurt you," she said. "I left because I found something that filled the emptiness I never understood." Her father looked away. "We don't accept it," he said firmly. "But we still love you." It wasn't acceptance, but it wasn't rejection either. And for Siwat, that small opening was enough. The first step to rebuild a bridge she thought was forever burned. They stayed in Thailand for several weeks. The conversations were slow, cautious. Siwat didn't preach. She only answered questions when asked. Her mother warmed up first, sharing meals, laughing again, even hugging her before bed. Her father remained distant, but he watched her closely. One night he found her praying in a corner of the room. When she finished, he asked softly, "Do you really feel peace in that?" She smiled gently. "Yes, Papa. More than I've ever known." He nodded slightly and walked away. That small moment meant the world. Eventually, it was time to return to Majlang. Back home, Siwat felt a renewed sense of strength. Her faith had not only survived, it had grown. She and Rahmat focused on expanding their small fried food business. They used their savings to open a second stall and began hiring local women in need of work. But their mission wasn't just economic. It was spiritual. They wanted to give back. To help others find the same peace that had changed their lives. With community support, they launched a small foundation, focused on women's empowerment and interfaith education. Siwat gave talks, not as a preacher, but as someone who had walked through doubt and found clarity. "I didn't become Muslim because someone told me to," she would say. "I became Muslim because Allah led me to the truth, and I opened my heart to it." People listened. Many were touched. Even those from different religions found inspiration in her honesty and humility. Still, challenges never fully disappeared. Some people whispered behind her back. Some members of the Buddhist community in Majlang called her a traitor. Online critics from Thailand labeled her a disgrace. But Siwat no longer let those voices define her. She had found her path. And she had found Rahmat, her partner not just in marriage, but in faith, purpose, and healing. One evening, while walking through the rice fields hand in hand, Rahmat asked, "Do you ever wish things had turned out differently?" Siwat paused. "I miss my past sometimes. But I don't regret my future." He smiled. "That's a beautiful way to put it." She looked at him. "Do you know what I've realized?" "What?" "That true peace isn't something you find in a place, or in silence. It's something you find when you let go of fear, and follow the truth." Months later, a letter arrived from her family. It was from her father. It wasn't full of warmth, but it was full of questions. About her life. Her faith. About Allah. It ended with, "I don't understand your decision, but I want to understand you." Siwat cried when she read it. That one sentence was more than she had ever hoped for. As time passed, Siwat and Rahmat became known not just as a loving couple, but as people who stood for peace, growth, and unity. Their simple life blossomed, rooted in faith, nourished by love, and guided by the truth. Siwat often stood outside during the early dawn hours, just before the first adhan echoed across Magelang. She would close her eyes, breathe deeply, and remember the dream that started it all. A glowing figure. A call to a distant land. And a journey, not away from who she was, but toward who she was always meant to become. And when the call to prayer finally rang out across the fields, her heart whispered back, "I hear you now." Welcome back to our channel. Today, we bring you a deeply moving story, one that begins in the lush heart of Bali and leads into the soul of a woman searching for truth. This is the story of Sophie Baker, a Dutch nurse whose life took an extraordinary turn after encountering Islam in the most unexpected way. How did a nurse from the Netherlands embrace Islam? And how did she end up marrying an Indonesian firefighter? Stay with us. Sophie Baker had been working at Sangla Hospital in Denpasar, Bali for several years. She had left the Netherlands not just for work, but for something deeper, an unspoken longing for peace and meaning that her previous life never quite gave her. Bali, with its stunning beaches and spiritual air, offered her many new experiences. But nothing would compare to what fate had written for her on an otherwise ordinary morning. As usual, Sophie began her shift with energy and focus. The hospital buzzed with activity, machines beeping, nurses moving briskly, and patients calling out in pain. It was the familiar chaos of emergency care. Suddenly, an alarm rang through the corridors, sharp and urgent. Moments later, an ambulance pulled in, carrying victims of a massive fire that had erupted at a local guesthouse in Denpasar. The fire had destroyed the building, leaving many critically injured, including one man whose condition was far worse than the rest. His name was Yanto, a firefighter who had rushed into the burning structure to save others. He had inhaled a dangerous amount of smoke and was now unconscious, barely breathing. Sophie immediately sprang into action, helping the team stabilize him. Despite being used to high-stress situations, something about this case felt different to her. She didn't know why, not yet. Hours passed. Yanto lay in the ICU, under close observation. Then, something remarkable happened. His eyes slowly opened. Still too weak to speak, he lifted his hands and began performing tayammum, dry ablution, with gentle movements. And then, using his frail strength, he began to perform prayer gestures. Right there, in a hospital bed, barely recovered from the edge of death, he prayed. Sophie stood frozen, watching from the side of the room. There was something so calm, so sacred in his movements. His face, though pale, carried an expression of deep peace. It wasn't just a medical recovery, it felt like a spiritual awakening. That image stayed with Sophie. In the following days, as Yanto's condition improved, Sophie continued to care for him. She checked his vitals, changed his monitored his oxygen, but all the while, a growing curiosity stirred in her heart. What kind of belief gives someone such serenity in the face of pain? What kind of faith makes a man rise from the brink of death to bow in prayer? She didn't have the answers yet, but she knew she wanted to find them. One afternoon, after her shift, Sophie stepped into the hospital's quiet garden, her favorite place to unwind. There, under the shade of a tree, she saw Yanto sitting alone, a peaceful smile resting on his face. He seemed deep in thought, yet at complete ease. Summoning her courage, Sophie walked over and sat beside him. "I want to understand," she said softly, not meeting his eyes. "I want to know more about your religion." Yanto turned to her, surprised at first. But then he smiled, not the kind of smile that was amused or proud, but one that carried warmth and sincerity. "Islam," he replied gently, "is simple, but its depth touches the soul. If you truly want to know, I'll be here for you." From that moment, something new began to grow between them. Their conversations continued, some short, some long, but all filled with meaning. Yanto never preached. He never pressured her. He just answered her questions with calm and clarity. He spoke of peace, of submission to one God, of purpose, and of the beauty of prayer. And Sophie listened, not just with her ears, but with her heart. That night, Sophie couldn't sleep. Her thoughts swirled, questions about life, her childhood faith, and the restlessness that had brought her halfway across the world. As she stared out the window, stars scattered across the Bali sky, she felt something she hadn't felt in years. Peace. It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. It was gentle, like a whisper to her soul. The next day, she met Yanto again. Their conversations deepened. What started as curiosity had become something more, a pull, a call towards something greater than herself. Yanto was no longer just a patient in her care. He had become her guide, someone showing her a path she never knew existed. When Yanto was finally discharged, Sophie felt a surprising pang of sadness. Their bond had grown quickly, but it felt rooted in something eternal. She didn't want it to end. Back home, she sat in her garden, staring at the night sky. Yanto's words echoed in her mind. This journey isn't just about finding answers. It's about opening your heart to receive what God is offering you. She closed her eyes and whispered to herself, "Maybe I'm ready." A few days later, standing in front of her mirror, Sophie held something in her hands she had never imagined she'd wear, a hijab. The soft fabric trembled slightly in her fingers as she wrapped it around her head. The reflection that stared back looked different, unfamiliar, yet somehow more complete. Her heart pounded with emotion, fear, hope, wonder, but as she looked into her own eyes, something inside her shifted. She smiled. Because for the first time in a very long time, she felt whole. And so began her quiet, beautiful journey into faith. The next morning, Sophie walked toward the park where she and Yanto often met. She wore the hijab for the very first time in public. Her steps were hesitant, but her heart was steady. When Yanto saw her, his eyes widened, not with surprise but with awe. "Subhanallah," he whispered, visibly moved. "You look radiant. Not just on the outside, but from within. This is such an honorable step." Sophie's eyes shimmered with tears. "Thank you," she said softly, "for guiding me. For helping me find where I truly belong." From that day forward, Sophie's life began to transform. She dove deeper into learning about Islam, attending religious classes at the mosque, studying the Qur'an, and soaking in every piece of guidance she could. What had once been a curiosity was now a way of life. The woman who once wandered the world in search of meaning now walked a path of clarity and conviction. But amid this spiritual awakening, another feeling quietly took root within her heart, one she had long been afraid to name. It was subtle at first, but as the days passed, it grew stronger, a deep, undeniable affection for Yanto. It wasn't just gratitude. It wasn't just admiration. It was love, pure, tender, and sincere. Still, she kept that feeling locked away, surrendering the matter to Allah, trusting that if it was written, it would come to pass. With each prayer, she found more peace. Her connection with Allah deepened, and she could feel her soul healing. Every sujud felt like her heart was being stitched together, thread by thread, with divine grace. But even as her heart transformed, she knew there was one final step she had yet to take, the Shahada, the formal declaration of faith. She had worn the hijab, embraced the prayer, and felt peace blossom in her chest. But saying the words, publicly, wholeheartedly, felt monumental. Not out of fear, but out of reverence. This wasn't just a sentence. It was a commitment. A covenant with the Almighty. One quiet morning, Yanto walked beside her to the mosque where she had been studying. As they stepped through the gates, the air around her felt different, lighter, calmer, as if the walls of the masjid were welcoming her home. Inside, the familiar imam smiled warmly. "Assalamu alaikum, sister. How are you today?" Sophie drew in a deep breath. "Alhamdulillah," I am ready. I want to declare my faith. The Imam nodded, his eyes kind. He led her gently to the front of the prayer hall, near the mihrab, where worshippers stand in devotion to Allah. Her hands trembled, not with fear, but with the overwhelming peace that had taken root inside her. Repeat after me, the Imam said softly. Sophie nodded, her voice tight with emotion, her eyes brimming with tears. I bear witness that there is no God but Allah, and I bear witness that Muhammad is his servant and his messenger. The words left her lips slowly, deliberately. Each syllable felt like a doorway opening. With every word, she was letting go of the past, and embracing a future filled with light. And in that moment, she was reborn. The chaos that once echoed within her heart fell silent. The emptiness that once consumed her was now filled with peace. She turned to Yanto, who stood beside her, his eyes wet with emotion. You did it, he whispered. You are now a Muslimah. Sophie smiled through her tears. This is the beginning of something beautiful. Outside, under the blue Bali sky, they stood quietly for a moment, the breeze carrying a sense of renewal. She had crossed the threshold, into a new life, a new identity, a new purpose. But as her soul settled into peace, her heart stirred again, with the feelings she could no longer ignore. That evening, they sat beneath the stars once more. The familiar ocean breeze brushed against their faces as waves hummed softly in the distance. Sophie turned to Yanto. Her heart pounded. Yanto, she began, her voice trembling with honesty. This journey, it's changed everything for me. It brought me to Allah, but it also brought me to you. I've tried to ignore it, but I can't anymore. I feel something deeper. Yanto met her gaze, his expression calm yet tender. Sophie, he said, from the first time I met you, so lost, yet so full of compassion, I felt something too. I've watched your heart open to Islam, and mine open to you. He paused, then continued, what we feel, it's more than emotion. It's a gift from Allah. And if we walk this path together, with faith and sincerity, we'll find true happiness. Sophie's heart overflowed. She had found faith. She had found peace. And now, she had found love. A few days later, Yanto proposed. There were no grand gestures, only quiet sincerity. On the beach where they first truly connected, under a sky painted gold by the setting sun, he turned to her with steady eyes and a heart full of hope. I don't just want to be your husband, he said. I want to be your partner in faith, your companion in life, the one who walks beside you, all the way to Jannah. Sophie didn't hesitate. Yes, she whispered. With all my heart. Their wedding was simple, but it was filled with light. On that same beach, now sacred in their memories, they stood side by side. The Imam recited the marriage contract. Sophie wore a modest white dress, her hijab flowing gently in the sea breeze. As they exchanged vows in the name of Allah, their hearts beat in perfect harmony. This wasn't just a wedding. It was a union of two souls, drawn together by faith, rooted in love, and blessed by divine mercy. Just before the ceremony, Sophie stood in front of a mirror. She looked at her reflection, not just at the bride she had become, but at the journey she had taken. From a nurse wandering the world in search of peace, to a believer, a wife, and a woman of faith. Her eyes sparkled, not just with joy, but with certainty. She was no longer lost. She had found her path. She had found her peace. And she had found her person. Tears shimmered in Sophie's eyes as she looked at Yanto and softly said, And I promise to stand by you, Yanto. To support you, to love you, and to face this life with sincerity, faith, and a heart full of gratitude. In the golden light of Bali's evening sun, with the waves whispering at the shore and the sky wide and open above them, Sophie and Yanto were finally united, husband and wife. Their wedding wasn't extravagant. It was spiritual. It wasn't just a ceremony, It was the beginning of a lifelong covenant, sealed not only by two hearts, but witnessed by the heavens. That night, beneath a canopy of stars, their celebration was quiet and filled with barakah. No grand decorations. No crowded halls. Just the two of them, hand in hand, grateful, content, and at peace. Their marriage wasn't just a love story. It was a spiritual partnership, the joining of two souls who had chosen to walk the path of faith together. Their life as a married couple began with strength and simplicity. Their home, though modest, overflowed with love, laughter, and prayer. Mornings began with far side by side, and evenings ended with whispered duas beneath a sky full of stars. But life, as always, brought its tests. Sophie, dedicated to her work at the hospital, often came home physically and emotionally exhausted. Yanto, proud of his role as a firefighter, carried the heavy burden of responsibility, always just one emergency call away from danger. One evening, after an especially long and difficult day, Yanto returned home, still in his smoke-stained uniform. His eyes were tired, his shoulders heavy with fatigue. Without a word, he sat on the couch and exhaled deeply. Sophie walked over silently and sat beside him, gently taking his hand. "I'm just tired," he whispered. "Sometimes I feel like I'm carrying too many lives in my hands." Sophie leaned her head on his shoulder and replied, "Allah sees your struggle, Yanto. You're never alone. We'll get through every storm, together." And they did. Every trial they faced, every wave of stress or doubt, only brought them closer. Their nightly prayers became sacred rituals. Their garden became a place of dreams, where they would talk about the future and raise heartfelt hopes of raising children in a home of love and iman. But life tested them once more. During a rescue mission, Yanto suffered a minor accident. It wasn't life-threatening, but it was enough to land him in the hospital for several days. When Sophie saw him lying in that hospital bed, the same way he once had when they first met, her heart clenched. Yet Yanto, even in pain, smiled softly and said, "Don't worry. Allah has a plan. This too is part of it." She stayed by his side every moment. And when he was finally discharged, the experience made them both reflect on the fragility of life, and the blessing of each day spent together. Sitting with him in the garden later that week, Sophie said, "We don't know what tomorrow holds, but I do know. I want to spend every tomorrow with you." Yanto gently smiled. "No matter what comes, we'll face it, side by side." As the days passed, their love continued to grow, not just as husband and wife, but as partners in purpose. Sophie, transformed by her spiritual journey, began engaging in social work. She joined efforts to bring healthcare to underserved women and children in Bali. It gave her new meaning, a way to give back and feel closer to Allah through service. Yanto supported her at every step. Proud, not just of what she was doing, but of who she had become. "What we do for others," he told her once, "is how we grow closer to Allah. You're doing something beautiful, Sophie." Together, they visited orphanages and helped those in need. One afternoon, after handing out supplies at a small orphanage, a young child ran up and hugged Sophie tightly. "Thank you, Kakak," the child said with a wide smile. Sophie knelt down, gently stroked the child's hair, and whispered, "You are precious. May Allah always protect you." Yanto stood nearby, watching the moment. His eyes filled with admiration. "You've become a light for others, Sophie." She looked at him with a tearful smile. "And you've been my light, since the very beginning." Over time, people in their community began to notice them, not for their professions, but for their sincerity. They didn't seek attention. But their kindness left a lasting impact. Their home became known not just for generosity, but for genuine love, faith, and service. One evening, as they sat on their balcony watching the stars, Sophie whispered, "I used to feel so small in this world, but now, I feel like I've found my place." Yanto held her hand and replied, "You've made this world better just by being in it." They didn't know what the future would bring, but they were ready. Together, they had built a life rooted in faith, stitched together with patience, love, and dua. And every test they endured only made them stronger. Under the night sky, with hearts full of gratitude, Sophie and Yanto knew they hadn't just found each other, they had found the true meaning of life. A love anchored in faith, a journey guided by Allah, and a future filled with hope.